Closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
It's estimated that up to 30% of school-aged children are either bullied or engage in bullying. School shootings and student suicides are often traced back to bullying behavior. Now, 49 states, including Illinois, now have laws on the books requiring schools to have anti-bullying programs in place. We'll talk about some of the latest techniques to control or stop bullying at school. That's coming up next on today's edition of The Professors. Joining us to talk about efforts to stop school bullying are Ms. Tosha Jackson, Assistant Principal at Fenger High School in Chicago, Ms. Jacqueline Moses, Professor at Trinity Christian College, Mr. Michael Brunson, the Chicago Teachers Union's Recording Secretary, and Dr. Nick Panomitros, Attorney and Professor at Kennedy King College. Welcome all. Now, before we begin our discussion, I want us to take a look at a feature story that aired on WYCC's In the Loop program this past spring. It's about some remarkable work going on at Fenger High School, where violence was once the norm. In the Loop co-host Chris Beery reports.
A student captured this horrifying scene on a cell phone for the world to see. The beating death of Darian Albert sparked national outrage. The 16-year-old caught in the middle of a fight between rival groups at Fenger High. The deadly attack took place near the Southside School, where violence had become a routine part of daily life.
Big fights in the hallways, riots, like mob action, police carrying people out every day.
There were constant gang fights, so much so at one point in time we had to have District 22 and District 5 come in and literally help us get the kids in the class because it was out of control.
Under the guidance of Fenger principal Liz Dozier, the school and its 500 students have made a remarkable transformation. Fenger is no longer the violent, out-of-control place it was less than 4 years ago. Now the school has become a model for teaching how to resolve conflicts peacefully. Darian Albert's murder became a catalyst for some big changes.
The first thing was the gang issue. So we're not having this. If you want to come here in this building every day, we are going to have school. You're going to go to class.
School officials took a stand. They put a stop to such behavior as gang signs flashed in hallways. They got parents involved. They set higher expectations. And they introduced the Peace Circle. It's a way to resolve conflicts peacefully based on a concept called restorative justice.
Restorative justice looks at is how do we look at the harm that occurred and who is obligated to repair the harm to that person that was harmed.
Fenger Dean Robert Spicer directs the Peace Circles, where students who get in fights must meet face-to-face and then talk through their conflicts. Key to their success is something called a talking piece.
This is one of the talking pieces that we use. And the talking piece is what we use as a way of allowing for our young people to actually speak and be heard.
Put things in circle that have to do with gangs, that have to do with items being stolen, that have to do with just a variety of really serious issues. And the circle does help us navigate that.
To help keep the peace, Fenger also offers anger management, grief counseling, and trauma therapy. The signs of success are clear. Attendance is up, fights are down, test scores are improving, and more students are graduating. One key to that success, more counseling. The typical Chicago public school has one counselor for every 300 students. Fenger has one for every 50 students.
It's the school is very intimate, they really embrace the students and love the students and show that they care about the students. So.
That was Chris Beery reporting for In the Loop, which can be seen every Sunday night at 6:30 p.m. and Thursday at 7 p.m. here on WYCC. Everyone, let's begin with our reactions. Tosha, it's my understanding you were assistant principal at the time of the incident, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So let's start with your reaction and let's go around.
Sure, it's always hard to even see that video and to just reflect on that experience back then. It was probably the most difficult time in our history. But then I see the faces of some of my students, like Vada, who graduated last year, and just, you know, we gave our lives to the school to change it, and it was truly blood, sweat, and tears, and just to see her and to hear her remarks, just, you know, it overwhelms me. It really does, because I see it every day, what we fight to overcome, and like I said, every day, what we're still fighting to overcome within the school. So,
all right, Nick, what's your reaction to the video?
You know, it's very sad to see an institution for learning have things like this transpire. You know, if you look years ago at schools in the United States, they were built with, you know, this grandeur, you know, architecture, and it was supposed to be what we want for our children, you know, in their minds, you know, learning, and then to see something like this is just horrible.
Jackie, let me ask you this. What will it take? I'm hoping it doesn't take another Fenger incident in order for what's being done now at Fenger High School to be the norm. So how do we get someone's attention to say this is the norm? I mean, I think it's ridiculous. Counseling 1 for every 300. It's now the ratio is 1 for every 50, which makes sense to us. How come it doesn't make sense to our administrative colleagues?
I think because we don't share that message of hope that Fenger is presenting right now. Most of what we see in the media is always the negative and the violence, but we don't often portray inner city schools with that message of hope that would, you know, transpire to say, if this school with its background of violence can turn it around, and then students are graduating. And it's a collaborative effort, and I think that you guys presented that very well, and I was really happy to see that.
Michael, how does the union help to make this the norm?
Well, as far as more counselors, that's one thing that we had been pushing for a long time, and I'm just glad to see that there are some steps in that direction. But not only do we need more counselors, we need more social workers, and we also need a more enriched curriculum that will keep the students engaged and, you know, bring back the joy in learning. You know, we've been pulling for not just counselors and wraparound services, but for more arts and music and drama and sports and things like that in the schools. We feel as though if you keep the students involved in positive activities, they don't have time for all the negative things. You know, as I'm looking at the movie there, it brings back memories, because at the time that occurred, I was teaching out in Allgale Gardens, so I knew some of the people that were involved in some of that. And I know that at that time in Allgale Gardens, I used to always think that these kids need more to do in school and after school to keep them positively engaged.
I agree. I know immediately after the Fenger incident, I know a group of my friends and I, we had our own kind of rally call at the Quaker House. And it was a really phenomenal event. It almost felt like church. It really did. I mean, I even had my mom come out, and it was just where we intentionally got all of the kids that we knew, because we felt it was a village teachable moment. And so we weren't waiting. We said, we can't wait for someone else to solve the problem. So I know it was like Tracy Hall, myself, Icha Devi, we all gathered at the Quaker House, and it was like literally we kind of like had church there. We had all of our children there, we were sharing poems, and it was a really wonderful inspiration moment. What I want to take away from this conversation is, first, I want us to be very clear on what bullying is. Because I was surprised to learn at what some things are now described as bullying are. But then from that conversation, I want to take away from this conversation of how can we relate to those who are watching, or what are some of the things we can do without romanticizing what was it like for us growing up, okay? So let's be honest. I know that when I was growing up, I know how I was told how to deal with a bully. You all know what I'm saying. My dad was like, crack them in the mouth. But these days, you can't go around cracking everybody in the mouth, right? No. You can't. So I want us to be able to have a conversation without us over-romanticizing, because when we romanticize, I think it takes away from how someone who's actually going through it really feels. And we don't want to desensitize that, okay? So bullying. If there are 4 types of bullying: physical, verbal, covert, and cyber. Now, I knew about the physical. We all know about the physical. You put your hands on somebody, right? Or you harm their property. I knew about the verbal, the name calling, negative remarks. Cyber, we all know that's kind of new now, and that is pretty detrimental, you know, posting pictures of people when you thought you had a more intimate moment. The one that surprised me was the covert, and that was gossiping. Gossiping is actually seen as a form of bullying.
Huge.
That's huge.
Huge.
Okay, so I need to know, how do we walk the fine line of bullying? Because you don't want to say people are being overly sensitive, but at the same time, I mean, how do we, especially as a parent, I'm a parent of 4 children in Chicago Public Schools. How do I walk that fine line of saying, okay, you got to know when to say no? It's kind of like Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold, you got to know when to run. How do we do that?
I think it's difficult. You know, one of the things that we try to really educate our kids on is that bullying is not defined by the person who does the bullying. Bullying is defined by the person who receives it. So regardless of your intent, because a lot of them, I'm not bullying. I wasn't trying to bully them. I was just saying.
Right,
you know,
I'm just keeping it real.
Right.
Right.
So the kids will say, but that doesn't, your intent does not determine whether it's bullying. It's how the person who receives the act, how it makes them feel. What they go away with, the interpretation that they have of your action is what determines whether or not it's bullying. So we had to really educate the kids on that because I think kids are, and it's a wonderful thing, right? Kids express themselves. Kids, they can be the most honest and
with
open.
No filter.
Right,
Bless
exactly.
their hearts.
Exactly. So teaching those skills of empathy, I think, are so important to really help them understand what bullying really is and the impact that it has on other peers.
Now, I just also want to say, I know like October, the month of October is like a anti-bullying awareness month, and the Illinois Federation of Teachers has put together a wonderful resource on their website. It's IllinoisKidsFirst.org. And it's not only just like how to identify bullying, but it's also how do you support those who feel they are being bullied. So you're right, you're talking about how to address the victim as opposed to concentrating on the victimizer. Is that a correct term, victimizer?
Victimizer.
If not, it'll be one today.
Yes.
Okay, so
Right.
let me ask you this. Okay, so when we talk about the victimization, are bullies victims too?
I would say a lot of times they are victims too. They're
I would wholeheartedly say that, and a lot of that comes from personal experience, because you know I grew up in a somewhat violent neighborhood and a somewhat violent household, and I do recall that a lot of the kids that would go out and bully other kids, they were just carrying on behavior that they learned within the house, or that they saw between their parents, or the way that their parents treated them. And another thing that came up is when I was teaching, you know, I taught at the primary grade level out in Allgale Gardens, which is one of the places that was involved in the Darian Albert tragedy, because the kids from Allgale Gardens had a conflict with the kids in the neighborhood around Fenger. But this was an area with a lot of conflict in it also. And it's interesting that you brought up the covert part, because so much violence and intimidation starts with words and a look or a gesture or the sucking of the teeth or the rolling of the eyes. It starts there. And if you want to stop the violence, you have to be aware of that.
Of that, right.
Yes.
Interesting. Can we really stop bullying?
I think that there is a great opportunity for us to do a lot of teaching on the road to stopping bullying, as I'm seeing in Fenger, that example of the restorative justice. Being open, you mentioned something about intentional, being intentional. What is really the definition? There has not been a universal definition of bullying. So people look at bullying to mean different things. The repetitiveness is one of those, definitions. The intent to cause harm is one of those definitions. And sometimes as students, young people, do they really always realize what they're doing? Do they know the golden rule? Do unto others as you'd have someone to do unto you. And when it's in an environment and that's all you see, because it's being done, does it mean that it's right? But if I do something over and over and over again and I've always thought it was right, then it becomes right to me. But having those intentional conversations, so we may not stop it, but we may be able to change lives in that process.
And a lot of it's hormonal too. I mean, you look at kids at that age, I always use the analogy of the birds. You see the springtime, the baby birds starting to fly with their mom, and they fly, but they don't fly that good. They'll bump into things. Sometimes they'll try to get out of the nest, they'll fall right down. And our children, or the kids at that age, tend to have a lot of the same characteristics. And so at that age, there's a lot of hormones moving around. And I think, going back to what you're talking about, they need more things to do. It's sort of, I don't know if that's true, because years ago, growing up, we didn't have that many things to do after school. These kids are full of activities. It seems as though it's a more stressful environment nowadays. And it's just harder for kids to, stay calm, and a lot of issues with, broken homes and things going on in the household. So I think that at the end of the day, it's probably something that's always, it's in a category of the age group, probably 12 to 16, 17. And usually after that, I think it probably dies down and goes away.
But sometimes it's even younger than that. And I'll give you, my daughter is in kindergarten, and she told me about one of her classmates. Now, I will say this as a parent. I am no model parent, but I do try to, I kind of walk the fine line. One of the tips I always tell parents is you always ask your kids, what happened at school today? Like, what happened that made you very happy? Oh, today I did such. What happened that made you very sad? And I get in the habit of always asking that. And typically I'll get the same response. Nothing. It's okay. Teacher gave me an extra credit point because I participated. This time she surprised me. She's 5. And she said, my classmate bent my finger back. And I was like, you what? And I said, well, who did you tell? I told the teacher. I said, okay. I said, you let mommy know if it happens again. Then I asked her the following week, hey, how's it going? I'm asking again. Next thing you know, now the girl done put a hole in her sock. And I'm like, why is she sitting so close to you that she can put a hole in your sock? And I'm like, and I have to be honest, I was very careful when I approached the teacher, because I did wonder, I'm like, okay, I don't want to start nothing, but isn't that bullying, or is it just kids being kids because she's the new kid in the classroom? So, but I think it was a teachable moment for me, because 2 things. I was reluctant, I'm being honest with you, I was reluctant to call it bullying because I didn't want to take it to that level just yet. But it was a good moment for me because I immediately reached out to the teacher. And I think that's one of the other important takeaways is the parental involvement. A lot of times we hear about the lack of parental involvement. But I'm finding out these days with technology, it don't take much to get involved. Everybody's got a smartphone. All you need is the teacher's email address, or am I assuming too much?
Yeah. I think we have to be careful. I agree with labeling a person as a bully, right? Because no parent wants their child labeled as a bully. But I do think we have to be very clear about what is bullying behavior. And so as early as kindergarten, kids may engage in bullying behavior and not realize that that's what they're doing. Doesn't mean that they are a bully, but the behavior that you're exhibiting right now is bullying behavior, and it's unacceptable. And I think kids need to be taught that even early as kindergarten, because what happens is it becomes very insidious, right? And it's slow and it moves along. And that child who is allowed to bend back the finger in kindergarten, if that behavior is not addressed, then they go first grade, they're doing something else, second grade. And it depends. If they grow up in a neighborhood where violence is the culture, then what other behaviors are they developing and growing up in? And that doesn't mean every child who pulls back a finger is going to become a bully.
That I understand, but I really
broke
had
my finger.
You know, I'm
break
just,
the other one.
I'm just really glad to hear you bringing it back all the way to the primary grades and all the way to these small acts, because that's where it all starts. I mean, I say that as a primary grade teacher.
It is.
It
I mean,
starts
I
down
really
there.
enjoyed, you know, I have to commend Miss Taylor. Miss Taylor, I felt she handled it very wonderfully. And I was being very reluctant to say, okay, I think this child is bullying my daughter, because I was like, I don't want to label her just yet. But I have to be honest. I'm being really frank. It took a lot for me to suck back in the following phrase: the next time she puts her hands on you.
That's the mother in you.
The mother in me was just like, the next time she puts her hands on you, defend yourself. Now, where do we draw the line on teaching folks how to defend themselves without being accused of being combative?
Well, that's where conflict resolution skills come in.
Okay.
Conflict resolution. You know, once again, going back to the primary grades, it would start with small acts. It starts with taunting. It starts with what the kids call picking at me. And you catch it there. And you said something that was very interesting. So many times kids do these things and they don't know why they're doing it. They don't realize that they're bullying someone. This is just what they do. And you have to point it out to them. Okay, think of what this makes that other person feel like. And how does it feel? Exactly, exactly. Develop those skills of empathy. And that's something that I was always trying to do in my classroom.
So is that missing, though, in some of our schools? When we're thinking about it from that primary grade, that has to be a school culture of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And when you're thinking about teaching that empathy, and we're talking about even the standards, the social emotional standards now, that's huge, because so often we're focused on the academics that socialization remains not as important as scores, testing, getting them prepared for the next grade.
That's kind of where I want to get to in this conversation, ironically. Now, Nick, you've been on the show a couple of times, and we've talked about the importance of civic engagement and civility. But you're right. Where are we talking about emotional intelligence? Does emotional intelligence need to be part of the curriculum? Now, if it's there, someone educate me and tell me exactly where it's at.
Well, they're pulling it back in with the social emotional state standards, but are we really being intentional again in our instruction of that, especially at that primary grade where those foundational skills will help as they continue on with?
Yeah, that's where that's where it has to happen. It has to. The intentionality has to happen at the school level, driven by the building leader. So if you have a building leader who does not believe in social emotional learning, restorative justice, civic engagement, you won't see it. You could see a school not have it. So somebody has to be pushing that. The building leader has to own that. I know at my school that is a priority. That's why we have a 1-to-50 counselor ratio. We don't have that anymore, by the way, because of the cut that we received in budget and loss of grant funding. So now we went from having a counseling department of maybe 8 and a counseling and clinician department of 8 to now we're down to 3.
You know, you all, I'm human.
So funding really.
I'm human.
Funding has a lot to do
I'm
with
human,
it.
and I am so frustrated by this because it's as if they are talking out the side of their necks. You know, you cannot hate the parent and love the child. You can't hate the child and love the parent.
Or the teacher.
Or the teacher, which reminds me, you're right. You're totally right, because what we're talking about is two things. Is that I loved in the clip how the student had said, I think it was Vada? Vada. I love the name Vada, by the way. It's a family name of ours, so I love the name Vada. She talked about in my school, I feel more intimacy and love. And oh my God, it just seems as if to talk about intimacy and love in the public school setting is almost like, shh. Right. How can you be an educator and not love the children that you serve? And go back to this trope, like, you need to love the people that you serve, because when you do, your policies are totally different. Yeah. Am I wrong, or am I crazy?
I'll tell you something, because as a teacher, you're always going to get those difficult students that take a little bit, they're more challenging, and they take a little bit more love.
Yes, they do.
But
and it happens in college, too.
If a student ever thinks that you don't like them, it's over. You can't do anything with them. They have to feel that you have feelings for them. And I just want to say one more thing.
Right.
As far as the social emotional training, you can do that in a small classroom. You cannot bring that in. You cannot do it in a class with 40 or 50 students. You just cannot do it.
But I think you have to. I mean, one of the things that I always teach our pre-service teachers that are in my classroom, I teach them that just as God loves us, He has to love us, but He can hate our behavior. That's how I have to approach my classroom. I have to love the student if I'm going to be able to teach them. Now, I can hate the behavior, and I can try to remediate that behavior, but first and foremost, I have to be able to love that student. And when you're thinking about that, even in the way classrooms are designed today for the collaborative learning and all of that, those are great tools to be examples, to model that. And with conflict resolution, I've seen when you're playing a game of Jeopardy in the classroom, and then there's that one student who, if you get the answer wrong, it's almost like bullying. Don't say it, don't do this. But then there are other groups that can work together collaboratively and work together as a team. So those are teachable moments that we as teachers have to step to the plate and not just let, whether that was a bullying incident in your daughter's school or not, but be able to say, you know, I'm watching something as a parent to you. I saw something, but I've got my eye on it, and I want you to know that I'm looking at it. I can't label it, but I want you to know, and then talk to that other parent to say, this is what I'm noticing. What can we do? And working together.
Now, I know we're running short on time, so hopefully we're going to do the online discussion. And when we do, I want to get back to the size of the classroom. Because one thing I know for certain is this, and I think they're probably going to get tired of me saying this, but I know this now to be ever so true. The educators' working conditions are our students' learning conditions. And the student learning conditions are our educators' working conditions. And those have got to be balanced. So let's get ready for that. So that's our show for today. The conversation continues online at WYCC.org. See you next time on The Professors.